Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about the top 10 dark romances of all time according to you. This is the third video in the series that I'm doing here on my channel where I collect your submissions for best romances in a particular subgenre, and then I break them down for you. Some of these books I love, some of these books I absolutely loathe, but I love making videos in this series because I love having a place to point y'all when you're asking for recommendations in a particular genre. I want to get into dark romance but don't know where to start. This is the video for you. Today, we're going to be talking about dark romances, which is a subgenre that I feel like is growing in popularity, especially with the rise of TikTok. From taboo relationships to scary situations, there's something for pretty much everyone here, though these books are definitely not for the faint of heart. I will try and reiterate this as we kind of go through the list, but I always recommend looking up content and trigger warnings ahead of going into romance in general, but especially when it comes to dark romances that have some kind of harder hitting topics. What might delight some readers could definitely horrify some, so definitely tread carefully. But before I walk you through these romances, I'd like to tell you a little bit about today's sponsor, Book of the Month. Book of the Month is a fast-growing online service for readers. Their mission is to promote new and emerging authors and help readers discover books they love. Their team vets hundreds of books each month and picks 5 to 7 new and early titles for us to choose from, making it easy to find new books to love. Plus, Book of the Month is risk-free. You can skip any month, anytime, and you won't be charged. This month, I picked Sign Here and The Kiss Curse. It was definitely really challenging to select the books that I wanted for this month because I really feel like all of them are books that I personally want to read, but I picked Sign Here because it's a horror novel which feels really fitting for the spooky season, and it's about a dude who works in hell and is trying to get the ultimate promotion by getting the last member of a family to sell their soul to him. Sounds incredible, and again, it sounds like the perfect book that I want to read in October. I definitely will be doing that in a weekly reading vlog coming up soon. And then per usual, I had to select a romance. I picked The Kiss Curse by Erin Sterling. This is the second book in the X-Tex series, and it follows a witch and her rivals to lovers relationship with a guy who is coming back to his hometown. Need I say more? It's giving me all of the Halloween Town vibes, and I am so here for it. Another thing that I'm here for is the fact that Book of the Month is now going to be shipping to Canada later this month. So whether you're one of my lovely Canadian subscribers or you're just now interested in signing up, go to bookofthemonth.com to check out this month's selections and use code TREAT to get your first book for $9.99. Thanks again to Book of the Month for sponsoring this video. Now let's dive into some of the dark romances. First up is a book that I read, or more accurately attempted to read, most recently, and that is It Ain't Me Babe by Tilly Cole. This is a book that I feel like stands out from others on this list because it takes a familiar subgenre or trope and really turns it on its head with adding something a little bit different. This book is about May and Styx, and at the start of the story, we understand that May is a part of a religious cult and is living on a commune. During a chance encounter, May briefly meets Styx when they're both really young children, and he is the son of a motorcycle club president, so definitely kind of an unlikely pairing there. But this meeting is something that they definitely hold really close to themselves and they really cherish through the years. It kind of brings them comfort, I would say. They only meet once, but whenever they're kind of having respective hard times, they think about the other person, and they meet again many years later when May is trying to escape from the commune. Kind of another chance circumstance where we have May again running away from this commune and somehow winding up on the doorstep of Styx and his motorcycle club. And this story is definitely one of self-discovery on the part of May and understanding on the part of Styx as they enter into this sort of like sexual relationship first. I will admit I did end up DNFing this book, or not finishing this book, at the 40% mark because I could tell pretty early on, honestly, that this book just wasn't entirely for me. There's a lot of emphasis here on chemistry and physical attraction, and while I don't think it's necessarily bad to have those things at the forefront of a romance, it felt a little bit weird to have that be the way that these two connected. It definitely took me out of the story considering how much trauma May is dealing with and how she couldn't quite figure out her feelings on the outside world. It just felt weird for her to kind of immediately switch up her feelings about sex when it came to Styx. I kind of wanted her to work through those emotions before they jumped in bed together. I will say I can see why this book was nominated as many times as it was. It's a fresh take on a motorcycle club romance, and I think if you're someone who likes thrillers or you really like reading about cults, this could definitely be a good entry place into dark romance for you. I also think that despite the amount of steam in this book, it would be a pretty good entry place for beginners because it definitely is very cut and dry. There's not a lot of angst in this story. If you're someone who tends to like shy away from angst, you just want a pretty straightforward romance with a lot of like interesting accessory side plots, I think this is definitely one worth picking up. But let's go ahead and see what y'all had to say about this one. I did, along with collecting your submissions on like what books you liked best, ask you what you like about these books. So let me tell you what you liked, what your responses were. First one says, Sons of Anarchy meets cult busting documentary. Dark and moody. Can't argue there. The cult aspect was really interesting and I enjoyed reading about a hero with with a speech disorder. And I actually have to really agree with that. It kind of slipped my mind that that is such a big component of this story, and I really did appreciate the details that this author added in with making the story feel so realistic, despite there being so many circumstances I feel like that feel so outside of our everyday, commonplace. I don't know about you, but I don't see a lot of people from motorcycle clubs in my everyday, but I think grounding the story in reality and having these characters deal with trauma or deal with different disorders, I think makes the story feel even more real and authentic. Again, I think this is a pretty good entry point into dark romance, even if it wasn't my personal favorite. Next up, and I promise I didn't DNF all of these, we have another DNF that I'll be honest, I really did not understand the hype for when I started reading it, but some of y'all just really absolutely adore this story. It's a book that I hear about time and time again on TikTok and on Instagram, so it's one that, I feel like we should give its credit and talk about right now. And that is Haunting Adeline by H.D. Carlton. This book is very thematically different, I would say, than the last one on this list. This one is about an author who decides to move back to her hometown. She's going to live in a sort of like spooky haunted mansion that her grandparents left her. At the start of this book, we definitely get to see Addie's personality unfold. She is extremely stubborn, which is something that kind of irked me a little bit. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love a stubborn heroine, but she was really something else. But that being said, I think it worked to the story's advantage in some ways, because having a heroine who can kind of stand up to some of the scary stuff that's going to go down is definitely much needed. Now, like I mentioned, I didn't finish this book and the synopsis doesn't really give a whole lot away, but I did read a lot of spoilery reviews for this book, so I feel like I have a pretty good idea of what it is and what it does. So this is primarily a stalker romance. We have Addie living in this haunted house and she has a guy who like watches her through her window, and she is kind of intrigued by this instead of scared like a normal person would be. And at the same time, we're getting these sort of like flashback diary entries from her either grandmother or great-grandmother, who is also dealing with a similar situation and has a stalker. Grandma takes it very far and ends up like sleeping with the stalker almost immediately, which is, I guess good for her in a way. But Addie deals with some other stuff before we kind of get to that point. I feel like I'm making this book sound a little bit more sedate than it actually is. Whenever I was reading those spoilery reviews, I was like, wow, this book really goes there. I think if you're someone who's like looking for something that really pushes the envelope in terms of the smutty scenes, you like dark and twisty plot lines, things that are not necessarily like realistic, I mean, you're gonna get it here, definitely, in Haunting Adeline. To this book's credit, I will say, I feel like the vibes are pretty immaculate. You definitely get that kind of like haunted mansion feel, and this feels like the kind of romance that like you would want to pick up in fall. It feels atmospheric. This is my second DNF from this author, so I feel like it definitely is a me thing at this point, but her reliance on curse words in the story irked me, which is kind of bizarre coming from someone who cusses pretty frequently here on my channel, but it didn't feel like it really added anything to the story, and if anything, like pulled me out of it, which feels kind of weird to say, again, because I really don't have any issues with curse words like on the surface level, like I'm fine with them, but I feel like it didn't add anything to the description of the story, and it really just made our heroine seem a little bit like petulant, especially in the way that she uses it when speaking to other people. In general, it just made the writing, I think, feel a little bit more juvenile than the story deserved, and it made me want to DNF the book. That being said, it was the case for a lot of you, so let's hear what you had to say about this book. What I think this author does really well is to create an atmosphere that draws you in, and the tone is consistent throughout the entire book. The author manages to create a good balance between spooky suspense, romance, and smut. I enjoyed both the heroine Addie and the hero Zaid, which is uncommon for me in dark romance. Zaid is literally plucked from my dreams. Even though the circumstances of their romance isn't all that realistic, I still believed in their relationship and their compatibility. I obviously didn't read long enough to see if these two were compatible and like would work well in a relationship, but it does please me greatly to hear that that definitely happens in the story, and maybe makes me kind of want to pick this book up again at some point, finish it off. We'll see if that ends up happening. But I think if you're looking again for some sex scenes that kind of push the envelope and you want a book that feels a little bit like Halloween, I think this one might be worth a try. Next up, we have one of my favorite romances of all time. If I DNF'd those other two books, I made up for it in reading this book multiple times. I mean multiple times. Punk 57 by Penelope Douglas. I will say I'm confused as to why this book is on this list and why it's categorized as a dark romance, but you know what, it is a new adult bully story, so I guess I could kind of understand why it's here. Misha, our hero, is the lead singer of a band, and he has been writing to his bestie Ryan for years. They were assigned as pen pals, I think in like the 3rd grade or something like that, but even beyond the 3rd grade, they decided to continue on their pen pal relationship, and they've really developed a bond over the years. But they've promised each other never to look each other up online or to meet in real life, so neither knows like what the other person looks like or, who they really are in real life. Until one fateful day, Misha figures out who Ryan is when they end up going to a house party and kind of like seeing each other from across the room, or at least he sees her. She is none the wiser. And Misha is not happy with what he finds. This sweet, tender girl that he has been writing to all these years is actually a mean bully of a cheerleader, and he wants to knock her down a couple of pegs. Now, as I'm saying all of that again, I can definitely understand why this one's on the list. It doesn't feel, in my opinion, like a true dark romance in comparison to the other ones on this list, but it definitely does have like a good entry feeling, I guess you could say, to dark romance. I like this book because it feels really balanced to me. We have a hero who is pretty mean to our heroine at the start of the story, but our heroine definitely dishes it back to him. It also has a relationship that I feel like builds really well over time. Similarly to the other two books on this list that we've already talked about, there is definitely a sexual component that comes up sooner rather than later in the story as opposed to like a slow burn contemporary, but I did actually appreciate the way that the relationship develops despite the fact that they, again, kind of fall into bed together quickly. I actually think it kind of works here because they were enemies at first and it was like, oh, I hate you so much, but like, I can't help but kiss you. And then later on, they kind of like break through the walls of hatred and like develop that sweet relationship, and I just ate it up. It also has one of my favorite tropes of all time, is that whole hidden identity through alternative forms of communication, i.e. pen pals thing. Here's what you had to say. This book speaks to my angsty, melodramatic inner teenager. It also has an underlying theme of belonging and finding your people, and that really resonated with me. It's angsty and overdramatic, but I eat that stuff right up. I think about this book all the time. There are so many great quotes, and Penelope just has a way of doing themes in their books that really works for me, and that's exactly how this one made me feel too. I love the angst, I love the melodrama, and I think if you were like kind of a little emo kid in 8th grade, like this is the book for you. It was a book that I stayed up really late finishing the first time, and I love my sleep, so you know it must have been a really compelling story. Again, I think this is a pretty good entry point into the genre, given that it actually, in my opinion, isn't a total dark romance, but I think if you want to kind of like dip your toes into the themes of dark romance and sort of like the non-traditional relationship dynamics of a dark romance, this is definitely a story that you should give a try. And I think it might help you figure out if you are into harder hitting books in this genre. Speaking of harder hitting books in this genre, oh boy, do I have a gruesome one for you. Sea of Ruin by Pam Godwin, the queen of dark romance herself. I feel like Pam Godwin is actually an author who gets overlooked a little bit in this genre because she doesn't pull a lot of the cheap tricks, in my opinion, that some other dark romance authors do. She doesn't lean into these kind of like over the top, outlandish, smutty scenes. She focuses more on crafting stories that have a lot of emotion in them, and I feel like that's really refreshing in a genre that tends to kind of lean into the shock and awe. So Sea of Ruin is actually a historical dark romance, which I think is unlike any of the others on this list, and it centers on our heroine Bennett, who is the daughter of a pirate lord and a lady, which is not great for her because it ends up creating a lot of problems in her life. At the beginning of this story, we have Bennett unfortunately being sold to a man, essentially, getting married off to a guy that's much older than her, and she has to escape that situation pretty early on as we're reading, and it is extremely harrowing and extremely gruesome at the very beginning of the story. But eventually Bennett does get away and she is able to kind of start this life for herself where she is pirating. And we find out at the very beginning of her like journey into pirating, or I guess not the beginning of her journey, but whenever we meet her years later, she is married to a fellow pirate, but she's kind of on the outs with him. We get to see her kind of rekindle the relationship with him and then also start a relationship with another gentleman. I believe in general this is a polyamorous story if that's something that appeals to you. Now I promise you that this is the only other book on this list that I have not finished, but unlike the other two, I actually didn't set this one down for any like technical issues with the story. The writing was absolutely phenomenal here. I feel like Pam Godwin, again, just has such an attention to detail, especially when it comes to the emotions, that I was definitely on the edge of my seat when I was reading, but I actually put this one down because it was too dark even for me. I feel like I'm getting softer in my old age. I feel like I'm not able to pick up as many dark romances as I develop and mature in my reading taste. Not that there's anything wrong, obviously, with liking a good dark romance, but this one, it was just a little bit too hard for me, and I'm very much willing to admit that. That being said, I think if you are someone who likes dark romance and you haven't picked this one up and you're looking for something dark and gritty, I think it's going to really get you. Again, I was really impressed by the writing, by the atmosphere, and the courage of our heroine. I feel like she was really well written and was someone that I could definitely root for, but I'll let y'all tell us what this book really did well. A badass pirate heroine who is running from her alpha hero pirate husband and gets captured by a stern yet sexy pirate hunter who is determined to turn her into the government, even if it would mean her death. If you don't already know the twist ending that involves these three characters, you're in for a treat. Godwin does dark in a way that you can't stop reading and are rooting for the heroine to come out on top. This book made me wish that dark historicals were more common because I haven't found another book quite like it. Honestly, y'all have almost convinced me again to like pick up this book after DNFing it. Again, I think if you're looking for a dark romance that doesn't feel campy and doesn't feel silly, and or you're a big Outlander or like kind of darker, grittier historical romance fan, I think this might be the perfect pick for you. Next up, we have another book with some gruesome going on, Still Beating by Jennifer Hartman. This is for the girlies who appreciate an emotional romance and also true crime. It opens up with our heroine Cora leaving her sister's birthday dinner with her sister's boyfriend and or Cora's like nemesis, Dean. They are trading spars, like verbal spars, until they are unfortunately kidnapped by a serial killer who takes them to his basement, where they are forced to do unspeakable things to stay alive. Not only is it challenging to stay alive in this environment, but they also have to kind of face their complicated feelings for each other. There is more there than just hate, and we get to see their relationship develop over time, even after they end up escaping from this kidnapper's lair. This book, I feel like, is another one that is kind of cut and dry. lie in that it's exactly what you think it's going to be from the start. It doesn't pull any punches, there are not a ton of twists, but you do really get to delve into the emotions and the healing of these characters, which I feel like is something that is not really seen a lot in dark romance. We don't typically get to see characters going to therapy, but that's something that is definitely present in this book. On a personal level, I wanted a little bit more emotional depth from the story, even though I just said that it's emotional. I wanted just a little bit more from it, but I did appreciate what it had to say, and I think y'all did too. This book shocked me with how well written it was and how much the story made sense in an unbelievable setting. I feel like this one went under the radar for so long. All of the hype is deserved. I just honestly did not think it was going to be as good as it was, especially the writing, but it really was. It's a book that I don't have a lot of objective criticism for because it did what it set out to do. Again, I think I'd recommend this one to lovers of true crime or anyone that really likes seeing people kind of rise up out of traumatic circumstances and have a really nice happily ever after. It feels weird to consider this one like a feel-good fuzzy romance, but I feel like the ending kind of feels that way. So if again you want something that feels really triumphant, I feel like this is one that you might want to give a try. Next up, we have another motorcycle club romance on this list, and oh boy, I want a Zeus for myself. Welcome to the Dark Side is a romance that's kind of hard to explain in a way that isn't weird, which is fair because it's a dark, taboo, age gap motorcycle club romance that is kind of weird. This book is about a Zeus who is the president of a motorcycle club, and when this girl is quite young, he ends up saving her from a rival motorcycle club's bullet fire, and then years later they end up getting together. It's a romance that is told partially in letter correspondence in past and present dual POVs, with emphasis on not only the relationship between Zeus and his lady, but also the goings-on of the motorcycle club. I think that's part of what I liked about this book, honestly, in comparison especially with It Ain't Me, Babe. I actually cared about the plotline of this book, and I really cared what happened to all of the side characters. There's actually a really sad character death that happens in this book, and it definitely broke me, which I wasn't expecting. I really only went into this book just looking for like a fun, steamy time between the hero and heroine, but I really grew to care about the surrounding characters and also like the plotline involving everyone. I also feel like this romance is a puzzle piece romance that I just don't often see. I think for a taboo relationship like the one in this book to work, you have to do something that shows the readers why these characters should be together despite all of the things keeping them apart, and I feel like Gianna Darling really knocked that out of the park. Also, she's really good at writing really nice dirty talk and smut scenes, and I, for one, am very much into that. I also feel like the whole series is a really fun time, and if you're looking for something really fun to marathon in the fall, this is definitely a series I would pick up. It has just the right amount of darkness and just the right amount of fall vibes. I don't know. I feel like it's a good fall pick, but don't take my word for it. Let's hear from you. Over the top, smutty, taboo, gritty, and fun. This is my favorite book in the series, but they're all pretty great. It's intro level dark romances, I think. And I honestly think so as well. I think for me, this is the perfect level of darkness. It is a good intro, but I feel like to me in general, like this is a good dark romance. Just pick it up if you're into this sort of thing, but especially if you're new to the idea of dark romance. Next, we have what I think a lot of people would consider to be a classic in the dark romance subgenre, and that is Corrupt by Penelope Douglas. Corrupt is a book about Michael and Erica. Michael is a couple of years older than Erica, and he and his 3 friends were troublemaking basketball players in high school. They made it their mission to wreak havoc, and one of the ways in which they did this was by terrorizing their hometown on Devil's Night, which I believe is the day before Halloween. But one year they get caught, and 3 of the 4 boys is sent to prison, and they all believe that Erica had something to do with it. So once they get out of jail, they decide they're going to hunt Erica down and make her life a living hell, though Michael starts to fall for Erica in the process and has to kind of like fight his friends in a sense throughout the story as he's like fighting his attraction for Erica. This book I would definitely consider a dark romance, unlike Punk 57, which is also by this author. It definitely has spookier themes and deals with harder hitting topics. Punk 57 does have a bully romance, but that's kind of the extent of the darkness of the story. Corrupt is set around Halloween with a revenge element, and it does deal with murder, so you know, not exactly lighthearted. It also has some more risque, steamy scenes, shall we say, than a traditional contemporary romance, especially in comparison to Punk 57, but honestly, it's kind of a thrill ride. This one is not my favorite romance that this author has written, but it's one that I've reread a couple of times simply for the vibes. I like the 4 guys in this series, I like the scary situations that pop up, and I like Erica as a heroine. And y'all tend to agree. I liked this book because for 1 week, this book was all I could think about, because the flashbacks were immaculate, and most of all, because I love a heroine who embraces her darker side, held her own, and won the respect of the many alpha males of the story, even becoming one of them. Some of those scenes are going to live rent-free in my head, and I 100% agree. It's definitely one of the most memorable books in this genre. And again, I actually think this is a really good entry-level dark romance, especially if you crave a romance series, because there are 4 books in the series to sink your teeth into. Next up is a selection that I think is actually really good for people who really like true crime, who really like thrillers, but don't typically pick up romance. So like the opposite, I would say, for the other books that I've talked about so far. Those are books for people who typically read, let's say, like a rom-com, and are looking for, you know, romantic themes in kind of like a darker setting. This, again, I would say is a book for people who are really already into, you know, the whole serial killer, thriller kind of vibe, but just want like maybe a little bit a little bit of romance in their story. There Are No Saints by Sophie Lark. This book is about Cole and Mara. Mara is a struggling artist and Cole is a very established artist and a sociopathic serial killer who becomes very obsessed with Mara. I think Mina from the channel Mina Reads said it best. This book is you if Joe Goldberg was rich and his love interests had inappropriate fear responses. I've never read a book before where I was rooting so hard for a guy who clearly had absolutely no morals. This book doesn't lean super heavily into the emotions, and I think for once that it actually works in this book's favor, given the characters and like their relationships and how they work. Cole is a really weird dude, and Mara is really attracted to him against her better judgment. And honestly, watching Cole start to feel things as the story goes on, I think makes the emotions all that more interesting. It's not like he comes out of his serial killer stupor at the very beginning of the book and is like, oh my god, I'm in love with this woman. He has to kind of like deal with the kind of weird feelings that this is bringing up in him, the fact that he's so obsessed with Mara. I was just so into it, and the plot line is so gripping. This is actually the first book in a duology, and the first book leaves off on the biggest cliffhanger. And I'm someone who is never really tempted to like pick up the second book immediately, but I definitely wanted to do that here. Did I? No, because the book wasn't out yet, but you best believe I'm going to be rereading this and then reading the sequel sometime in October because wow. But let's hear what y'all liked about it. Maybe it's just a toxic trait in me, but I definitely love this kind of hero, the crazy smart ones in dark romances. I also really like when there are two main characters who live in their own world that no one can interfere with. Someone else said, the mix of obsession and possession the hero had was perfection to me. I didn't know what was going to happen at any moment, and I love that we had a strong female main character in a dark romance. It's so much fun to read. And then lastly, I loved seeing how Cole slowly becomes utterly fascinated with Mara. Their romance is exciting and edge of your seat, but it also deals with heavier topics to do with Mara's trauma that felt really healing for me to read. Now we're on to our final two, and I definitely get why both of these entries are as high as they are on this list, with number 2 being one of my absolute favorites. Kill Switch by Penelope Douglas is the third book in the Devil's Night series. We talked about Corrupt earlier on, which is the first book. Kill Switch is the third book in the series. I just feel like that says something about their writing. It seems like dark romance would be one of those genres that would be incredibly challenging to write because people go into a romance expecting there to be this light found in love, and I feel like having these two themes that kind of contrast each other and yet having them work so well together, it's gotta be hard to write, and yet Penelope Douglas just does that so well time and again. This book follows Damon and his second chance childhood friends to lovers relationship with his heroine Winter. This book is definitely one of the darker ones on this list thematically, and I definitely recommend looking up content warnings for this one because it definitely goes places that some of these other books don't. But it follows a similar formula to the other two books in this series in that it follows a guy with a single-minded obsession on getting revenge. What sets this book apart from the previous two though is that this one has the absolutely insane redemption arc of Damon, who is a character that you absolutely grow to hate in the first two books. I knew at the very beginning that Damon's book was going to be the third one in the series, and I was not looking forward to it at all. I was honestly like on the fence whether or not I would read it, but I picked it up despite myself, and wow, I was so impressed, and it quickly became my favorite book in the entire series. I really like that this book shows Damon's trauma and his backstory and gets you to empathize with him in a way that I honestly didn't think was possible. Additionally, you get to see not only his trauma that makes him the way that he is, but also get to see how he sets his trauma aside to enter into, honestly, like a fairly healthy relationship with Winter. I mean, it's a dark romance, like how healthy can the relationship be? But getting to see how he dotes on her and the kind of like alpha male that he is with her, it's actually just like really endearing, and he definitely has a place in my heart as like one of my book boyfriends, I'll say it. I could gush for ages about this book, but in general, I think this book is just a compelling read despite some of the rougher content, and I know that some of y'all agree with me as well. Y'all said, I loved the Damon redemption arc, thought Winter was a really interesting and different protagonist, her blindness meant the author had to describe everything in her chapters without vision, and the general spooky and gothic vibes were pretty great. This is a book that I would recommend to a seasoned dark romance lover or someone who's just looking to continue on with the series. And then lastly, a book series that really seemed to blow up out of nowhere this year, our number 1 spot on this list, Mindfuck by St. Abbey. This is a 5-book series that was published by the sadly recently deceased St. Abbey in 2016, and it has been getting so much love on the internet this year, which has really actually made me smile. It follows our heroine Lana, who is on a mission to right some wrongs. She and some of her family members have been very sadly mistreated, to say the least, in the past by some really sick individuals, and her goal is to take them out one by one without getting caught, which is pretty fun in and of itself, but it gets even juicier when we have the romantic component come into the story, which is that Lana falls in love with an FBI agent who is working her case. Now, I'll admit I only ended up reading the first book in the series, but I don't think that works against me here because I absolutely adored that book. It's less than 200 pages and it sucks you right in from the beginning. I will say, I think calling this book a romance does this book a bit of a disservice because I feel like the romance here really only works to add to the conflict of the story. Like, Lana is having to sneak around and make sure that she doesn't get caught, not only by like people in general, but by this guy that she is sleeping with. And I feel like that makes the story even more exciting than it would be otherwise. But I don't think the romance itself is like built on particularly strong strong ground. This is not really a romance that I would say pick up because it's a romance. Like, it's just a book that happens to have a romance in it, in my humble opinion. And who knows, maybe it does resolve itself better as the other books go on. Maybe we do end up kind of like rooting for the relationship between Lana and the FBI agent. But in this first book, I really didn't care about him, and I was just excited to see what happened next. I feel like this is another one of those books that might get overlooked by people because when I looked at it from like a romance reader perspective, before knowing, you know, the hype surrounding this book, I didn't really feel like picking it up because it didn't seem like it was very romance heavy. And then I feel like from a thriller, like mystery lover perspective, you probably wouldn't pick this book up because you would think of it as a romance. But I do think it's kind of a book that anyone would be happy picking up from either of those camps, if you're like a mystery thriller lover or if you're a romance lover. And I actually think it could be a really good point of entry into dark romance for a traditional thriller reader, kind of like There Are No Saints. Y'all had to say, I think these novellas have the perfect balance of romance and dark mystery. I loved the grumpy girl representation, as I'm tired of the grumpy boy sunshine girl trope and the vulnerable heroine always needing rescuing. Lana slays her own MFing dragons. She's a powerful serial killing grump, while Logan is her clueless golden retriever FBI boyfriend, and I ate that shit up. But the main reason this book is numero uno is that while I support women's rights, I more importantly support women's wrongs. Amen. I couldn't have said it better myself, or should I say a woman. Those are the top 10 dark romances of all time according to you. I had a lot of fun kind of prepping for this video, getting to see what dark romances y'all really enjoy, seeing how those aligned or did not align with my personal love of dark romance. In the description down below, I'm going to leave a handful of other dark romances that didn't make it onto this list, but that I personally really enjoy if you're looking for something else, something that isn't already on this list. Now, as for the next episode or the next video of this series, I'm asking for your best books in the kind of sports romance subgenre. So go ahead and leave me your favorite sports romances in the Google form in the description down below. If you have multiple sports romances, feel free to do multiple submissions. That video will be posted sometime in 2023, which feels absolutely mind-blowing to say, but I have a lot of stuff planned between now and then. So that video is going to get pushed to 2023, but I appreciate your submissions and they will be used. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found something new and exciting to read. Let me know in the comments down below if there's any other dark romances that you personally love so that people watching this video have even more recommendations to take with them. But thanks again for watching this video. I love y'all so much, and until next time.